be 16 around the year 2000. Wasn't an outcast, but wasn't really a popular kid either. Kinda did my own thing, really. Shared world history with this kid. His name was Greg. And this was his fall from grace and into autism. Greg, at this point, was quiet and reserved. Never did anything to get bullied, especially after Columbine. All of that was going to change soon, though. Friday, he was totally fine. But that Monday... Apparently, Greg's parents had bought him a computer and an internet connection. Oh, how 2 days can change a man. He obviously hadn't showered at all since Friday. He didn't really pay attention during class and was mostly drawing in his notebook. His smell was palpable. The bell finally rang. Greg collected his things and headed for the door, but not before he bumped into a guy named Mike. Mike was not pleased with Greg's odor. Jesus, Greg, you fucking reek. Greg stood silent for a moment, and then he did it. He fucking growled at Mike. Mike just pushed Greg out of the way and made his way into the hallway and walked to his next class. The rest of the kids gave Greg a strange room for the rest of the day. Tuesday. Apparently Greg didn't do his homework the night before. Instead, he bought a gray hoodie and some cloth, and sewed some ears to the hood. At least he showered this time, thankfully. The teacher was this really nice vegan lady from Oregon. She was a little pushy with homework, but that was it really. She asked for homework to be passed up front. Everyone had theirs in. "Greg, where's your homework?" Silence. "Greg?" She approached his desk. The room was strangely tense. Before this, Greg was a good student. She was now standing at Greg's desk. "Greg?" She reached out for a piece of paper she assumed was his homework, and then he snapped at her. Not like screaming or yelling, but he tried to bite her. You could actually hear the clack of his teeth. The teacher gasped. Greg just got up and Naruto ran out of the room. No one had seen such a thing before, and we were really taken aback by him trying to bite the teacher. But the way he ran... The teacher called security. No one saw Greg for the rest of the day until one of the stoner kids reported seeing Greg in after-school detention. Apparently he got on a table, curled up into a ball, and tried to nap. The Indian man in charge didn't care enough to bother him. Wednesday. Greg apparently wanted to make it up to the teacher. Unfortunately, she was a little late because her Ford broke down. One of the football players brought her to campus on his motorcycle. She had what was left of a bug on her cheek that she missed. She walked into the class 10 minutes after it had started. She apologized for being late. Greg walked up to her. Hood up, shitty cloth ears flopping. She looked at him, puzzled. "Is there something you want to tell me, Greg?" She was probably hoping for an apology. Greg grabbed her face. He had folded notebook paper in his hand, pulled her close to his, and licked her cheek. And the bug guts, too. The whole class went dead silent. Then Greg tucked the paper into her breast pocket and sat back down. The teacher, as a testament to her character, pretended that it never happened. The class went on as normal. She looked shaky and on the verge of tears the entire time while we were talking about the Boxer Rebellion. When the bell rang, Greg bolted full Naruto style out of the room. His hoodie came loose and fell off, revealing a really shitty attempt at anime hair. I didn't see him again for the rest of the day. After the school, I was walking home, and I saw our U.S. history teacher talking to the school cop, with her equally vegan and upset boyfriend there too. We didn't see Greg for 2 weeks after that. Thursday, 2 weeks after the incident. Greg was back. If you think he was bad after a weekend of early 2000s internet, Greg had been exposed for a full 2 weeks. He clearly still hadn't showered at all. He looked like he had slept, ate, and shat in the gray-eared hoodie. He reeked. He also added a very poorly made tail to the back. By this time, we were on World War I. The teacher decided to hold class outdoors for once to demonstrate some things. As soon as we got outside, everyone put themselves upwind of Greg. The teacher would live to regret having class outside. Everything was going fine. We were discussing the Battle of the Somme in the gentle Arizona winter.
Greg, what are you doing?
All eyes shot to Greg to see what horror we were about to witness. Greg was digging with one hand in the soft soil. He did not answer. Everyone turned back to the teacher, and then the digging got more ferocious.
Greg, please stop digging. The groundskeepers worked really hard to grow that grass.
No answer. He kept digging.
Greg?
The digging intensified.
Greg, stop it!
Still nothing. Mike stood up and started walking towards Greg to stop him. By this time, Greg had dug a foot-deep hole about a square foot wide. Everyone stopped, their faces when Greg turned around, dropped his pants, and started to poo. Oh God, the stench. This is probably the first shit he had in 2 weeks. Everyone flipped and got as far away from him as possible. Greg managed to fill the entire hole up. He then lifted his pants, sniffed it, and then buried it. The 9 out of 10 goth girl fainted. Ooh. Greg got sent to the office, and was then sent home for the day. Friday. Greg was tolerable that day. Nothing happened. The following Monday, though, Greg was late to class. Like really late. The poor teacher marked him as absent. Halfway through the Treaty of Versailles, guess who showed up? Fucking Greg. And the horror. We didn't see it at first, or for the next 10 minutes. And then we heard it. A crunch. And not the normal granola kind. Like the wet, gross kind. The kind that something biting into a bone would make. The girl in front of Greg turned around. She flipped her shit.
Greg, what the fuck?
Greg had a bird. A half-eaten bird. He was late because of this. I was marginally impressed because he managed to catch a real bird, kill it, and partially eat it. I also wanted to throw up. The teacher approached him and attempted to rescue the poor avian creature from this kid. Greg wasn't having it. He actually landed a bite on her. A bad one. Mike had enough of his shit. Before he could react, though, Greg threw his meal at him. The distraction worked. Greg attempted to jump over a desk. He failed and landed face first on the tile. Luckily, he had enough time to get up, spit out some blood, and Naruto run out of the room. Somehow he wasn't expelled for this. Our teacher missed 2 weeks of school because of an infection, though. About a week or two into our poor teacher's absence, the substitute put us in the computer lab to research some shit. She sat right behind Greg. Thanks to her fatness and her odor, she was immune to Greg's smell barrier. Our schedule was fucked that day. We were having an assembly for 8th graders that would be attending next year. So we only had our first class that day. For 8 hours. We broke for lunch. Nothing weird happened with Greg. Yet. When we got back, though, shit started happening. Slowly. Everyone had the post-lunch sleepies. Half the class was napping at their terminals. The others were either working or goofing off. I was helping the 9 out of 10 goth girl work on her horror novel. Wasn't too bad except for some grammatical errors. And we were flirting. Shit was cash. The substitute fell asleep at some point, leaving Greg free to do as he pleased, and he was really pleasing himself. I happened to glance up and catch it. Poorly drawn, early 2000s, furry porn. Greg was jacking it pretty hard. He must have just started because no one seemed to have noticed yet. Hey, Don, what are you staring at? Oh my god! The goth girl freaked out. This, in turn, drew attention to Greg. who also happened to start climaxing. The next 5 seconds were beautiful. The screaming woke up the sub. Greg panicked mid-cum. Instead of turning off the computer, he pushed the whole monitor off the desk. He ended up getting cum everywhere. After this incident, he was handed to the Tard Wranglers. He was transferred out of regular classes, but this was not the end of Wolfman Greg. We went a month without Greg's shenanigans. Everything was peaceful. I even managed to sleep with the goth girl a couple of times outside of class. Gregory was even allowed to join us occasionally. He was heavily guarded by our wrangler, though. He didn't speak much, but we nicknamed him 8-Ball. 8-Ball didn't take Greg's shit, except for letting him growl or whine once in a while. Near the end of junior year, we thought we had heard the last of Wolfman Greg. Nope. Lunchtime. I was sitting with the goth girl, Marion, and her gaggle of dark brooding sisters. Had a good view of the courtyard where the other tables were at. We were talking about Poe when it happened. The doors to the Tard building burst open, and there was Greg. I was horrified. I watched him sprint out, howling. 8-Ball nowhere to be seen. No one really cared or noticed the horror about to happen. Greg wandered around for a bit, singling out prey. This poor, shy girl named Marissa. He snuck up behind her. Oh God. He pinned her to the table and pretended to mount her. He had his dick out and was rubbing it on the back of her sweater, howling like a wolf the whole time. Everyone went apeshit and scattered. This had to be the final straw. This went on for what felt like forever. Eventually, he came on Marissa's back. 8-Ball finally showed up after getting Arby's. Greg was expelled after this and labeled a sex offender. Marissa dropped out. 8-Ball lost his job. That was the end of Wolfman Greg for high school. But I have one more. This happened 6 months ago. It's been 15 years since seeing Greg. He had left my mind entirely. Driving through my old town to visit my folks. Then, I see it. Is that? No fucking way. Holy shit. It's fucking Greg. On a vintage Vespa. I am in fucking awe that he's got a sweet scooter and I'm on a second-hand bike. Nearly rear-end a taxi. He pulls up next to me. Thankfully, he doesn't recognize me. I can fucking smell him through my helmet. I nearly puke. Manage to distance myself from him and get to my parents' place. Dinner is fine, mom's doing great, blah blah blah. Decide to meet up with some old friends for a ride. Step outside. See that fucking Vespa in the neighbor's driveway. Is that? No. Ignore it and go on a cruise. Come home a few hours later. Vespa is still there. Please no. Greg lives next door to my folks now. After talking to the now 3 out of 10 goth girl on Facebook, I found out that Greg's folks had died, and he inherited a large chunk of change. Bought the house next to my parents. Is a complete neat. He doesn't do anything but browse the internet probably and do Wolfman things. I try not to let this crush my soul as I crawl into my old bunk bed to sleep for the night. As I'm drifting off to the thought of making the goth girl of yesteryear swallow my cum and calling me her owner, I hear it. It's fucking howling. Damn it, Greg. My boner is ruined. It's loud, too. Greg's fucking howling keeps me up until 3 a.m. I finally fell asleep. Wake up the next morning. Go through the day with my folks, a shell of my former self. That night, it happens again. My terror is replaced with rage. I open my window. This is it. Greg, it's 11 o'clock at night. I have to go home tomorrow and I need to sleep. Shut the fuck up! I slam my window. It's quiet now. Fell asleep and left the next morning. A few months later, my mom calls me. The cops entered Greg's home due to a smell complaint. They found Greg. Greg was dead. I inadvertently got him to kill himself. I don't know anything else, but the house was torn down. It's now an empty lot. But I, and hundreds of others, still remember Wolfman Greg. Godspeed, you magnificent, early, furry trash bastard.